Recording in progress. So Daniel chapter 2. Last week we talked, the last 2 weeks really, we talked through chapter 1. And remember, Daniel and his friends have been deported from Jerusalem, and they're now in the city of Babylon. Yes, they're in Babylon. And they're in Babylon, and what are they doing there? What's their job? To learn, yeah, right. Their job, as given by the king, is to learn. But to learn what, Rachel? To learn the Babylonian ways, their culture, their science, their religion, all of these things, in order that they might do what?
Essentially, be ambassadors.
Be ambassadors, be role models to who? To the rest of the Jerusalem, the Jews who have been deported with them. But remember, right, this is the 605-ish kind of time frame. This is the first of 3 deportations, and there's still a bunch of Jews back in Jerusalem. That will change over time as they continue to revolt back in Jerusalem, and Nebuchadnezzar finally gets fed up with them and just destroys the temple and hauls a whole bunch off. And then we find that you'll have a prophet in Ezekiel who's in Babylon with Daniel, and Jeremiah who is in Jerusalem, and they're all prophesying and living at about the same time, or at the exact same time. So we talked a lot about character last week. What is character?
Who you are when no one's watching.
Who you are when no one's watching. That's a good way of putting it, right? So Daniel and his friends did what to show their character? What did they do in the midst of this foreign world that they had been thrown into? So in chapter 1,
They didn't do the foreign stuff
they didn't do the foreign stuff, and where did that start?
with the food that they were given.
Started before, yes, but
Oh, hold on.
with a choice, right, in their hearts. Exactly right. So did you guys have any chances this week or run into any situations where you had to make a choice about how you were going to behave or act?
Yes.
Yeah? You want to tell us about it?
I was doing my biology homework and I made the choice to finish my assignment, even though I was ready to call Jill again and be like, I need you.
So Danny made a choice to stick with it, and stick with her homework, and get everything done.
86 on my first exam.
And fantastic. That's great. Fantastic. Anybody else have a choice where maybe you were thrown into a situation where everybody was acting one way and you were going to act a different way?
I mean, I actually worked on my group project this week.
For somebody who expects to go on 2 trips, I'm pleased to hear that.
No, she worked on a group project, nobody else did.
Okay, that's great.
I went back out to the trail that we were supposed to ID plants on because one of my group members didn't save 2 of the pictures that we needed.
Oh, bad news. I don't know if you heard that or not, but a group member did not save pictures that they needed. I got thrown into a meeting this week where the purpose of the meeting was really to roll out some new policies and procedures and the way that the California group does things versus the way that we at my company have done things in the past, and the changes that need to be made. And you know, we had one guy who just was extremely negative about the whole thing, and it really could have rolled into a big complaint session about changing and what isn't going right and all these things that are wrong. And so, you know, I don't know if you will get into situations where it would be very easy to jump on that bandwagon and say, yeah, you're right, this stinks and that's terrible. And so I made a choice not to do that. And in fact, because I was one of the leaders, to be able to shut it down and say, hey, we're not here to talk about that particular issue. We're here to talk about this issue. So I get that there are issues over here. Let's park those for a later discussion. And let's talk about this here, okay? So character is what people come, or how people come to know who you are, right? When you hear somebody, and you don't hear this expression as much today as you used to, but you used to hear people say, Nathan's a man of good character, right? And that meant something. We don't really hear that same expression, but we tend to hear, oh, he's a good guy, or yeah, she's trustworthy, right? That kind of thing. That's what Daniel and his friends decided that they were going to be with respect to God, right? It wasn't that they were trying to be trustworthy to Nebuchadnezzar or the chief of his officials, but they were trying to be faithful to God and what God's expectations of them were. And that's when they said, hey, I'm going to purpose here in my heart to go ahead and do the right thing, not according to man, but according to God. And we see that all the way, we get all the way to the New Testament. Remember when Peter and I think it's Peter and John, they get arrested and they're going to get thrown in jail, and the Jewish leadership in one of the towns is really mad at them because they're preaching this whole Jesus is the Messiah thing, and oh, by the way, you Jews killed him, right? They don't like that too much. And so they take him out and they put him before the court, and they say, look, we'll let you guys go if you stop preaching about this Jesus guy. And they say, hey, look, you decide what's right in your eyes, but we know the right thing to do is to preach Jesus. And so we're going to do what's right by God. You do what's right by whatever you want to do, and we'll accept the consequences. And we'll see that later in Daniel. We'll see this same faith and perseverance pop up again. But now we are moving into chapter 2, okay? And chapter 2 is where some of the fun stuff starts. So we'll see if we get through it tonight. What? I know, Julia, Julia suggests that we might not be able to finish a whole chapter in one night. I'm sure she meant that as a complimentary.
Always.
That's right. 2 weeks for it. All right, so let's turn to Daniel chapter 2, and let's have somebody read verses 1 through 6, and then 7 through 13. And tell me which version you're going to read out of, which version of the Bible you're using in your app or that you've got in front of you. Stash, you got something? What do you got?
New King James.
New King James, okay.
All right, 1 through 6.
1 through 6.
In the second year of his reign, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams. His mind was troubled and he could not sleep. So the king summoned magicians, enchanters, sorcerers, and astrologers to tell him what he had dreamed. When they came in before the king, he said to them, I have had a dream that troubles me, and I want to know what it means. And the astrologers answered the king, may the king live forever. Tell the servants the dream, and we will interpret it. The king replied, this is what I have firmly decided. If you do not tell me what my dream was and interpret it, I will cut the pieces and your houses turn into piles of rubble. But if you tell me the dream and explain it, you will receive from me gifts and rewards of great honor. So tell me the dream and interpret it for me.
All right, so tell me again what version you're using, because that is not the New King James.
It says New King James Version.
No.
Negatory, Ghost Rider.
Negatory Ghost Rider.
It's
Oh,
the NIV.
you know what? It's not, hold on. It says replace select the
Yeah,
version.
Okay, so he was reading the NIV. I don't know whether you can hear him or not. All right. Yeah, that's what you know. Yeah, okay, all right. So somebody give me verses 7 through 13.
You want the same version?
That was weird.
No, I don't care. It's fine. Just somebody read.
Once more they replied, let the king tell his servants the dream, and we will interpret it. Then the king answered, I am certain that you are trying to gain time, but you realize that this is what I have firmly decided. If you do not tell me the dream, there is only one penalty for you. You have conspired to tell me misleading and wicked things, hoping the situation will change. So then, tell me the dream, and I will know that you can interpret it. The astrologers answered the king, there is no one on earth who can do what the king asks. No king, however great and mighty, has ever asked such a thing of any magician or enchanter or astrologer. What the king asks is too difficult. No one can reveal it to the king except the gods, and they do not know who live among him. This made the king so angry and furious that he ordered the execution of all the wise men of Babylon. So the decree was issued to put the wise men to death, and men were sent to look for Daniel and his friends to put them to death.
Well, it's a good thing that Nebuchadnezzar has an even temper and doesn't get too upset or fly off the handle.
Right?
All right. Look at the end of chapter 1. How long were Daniel and his friends in training? 3 years. And when does this take place? It's in the first verse of chapter 2.
Second year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign. Third. In the second year, now in the second year.
What does yours say, Patty?
I'm sorry, I am in the third year of the reign.
No. First verse of chapter 2.
Oh, pardon me. I was gonna say, what? I'm
So
sorry.
end of chapter 1 says, hey, they're in training for 3 years. This one says second year of Nebuchadnezzar as king. Okay, so their training went on for 3 years. So the question is, we can interpret this 2 ways. Okay, one is we could say, well, Daniel is now, this is actually going back in time, right? Because if it's the second year, it would be here, right? Or one of the other commentators says the Babylonians didn't count the first year of the king's accession as part of the reign. So they would say, well, forget that. And then this would be year 1, and then this would be year 2. I don't know that it really makes a difference to us, other than to say, by this point, right? Daniel and his buddies, if it's year 3 and they had passed the training program and they're going to get killed like with all the other wise men, that kind of makes more sense to me, right? They've gone and they've passed their exam, and now they're getting, they're going to get the axe, quite literally. So if you're the king and you have a problem, what do? Like, if you're, what, you kill everybody? Okay, that's perhaps a solution, okay? But think about it, if you're the president of the United States and you've got an issue, who do you talk to? If you're the CEO of the company, who do you talk to? If you're the head coach, and you've got to make a tough or difficult decision, who do you talk to? Right? Who would you normally talk to? Well, the king probably doesn't have a lot of friends, right? If you're the king and you go around conquering people, you probably don't call up the other kings that you conquered and say, hey, hey, king to king, what do you think about this? Right? If you're normally, you might say, well, maybe he's got a counselor he's going to go to a psychiatrist and say, having trouble sleeping, I just need you to help me out with this. Well, if you're the king, that's probably not a great thing. Like if we hear that the president, is spending a lot of time on the counseling couch, regardless of who that person is, that's probably not a good sign for what the job is doing to him or her. What about going to your spiritual counselor, right? Going to your preacher? Well, well, kind of, but he's supposed to be the direct link to the gods, right? He is the king, right? So, that's a problem. And in Babylon, dreams were really, really important, and their interpretation was really important. So, do you remember some other people in the scriptures that had dreams and had to get them interpreted? In the Old Testament? Maybe in the first book of the Bible? Pharaoh, yeah. Remember, Pharaoh has the dream and he's got these 7 fat cows and 7 skinny cows. He's like, I don't know what that means. Why am I dreaming about cows? And who interprets the dream? Joseph, right? He comes in and says, hey, king, here's the deal. You're going to have 7 years where there's a great harvest and you're going to get plenty of food, and then you're going to have really 7 lean years. It's going to be really, really bad. So my suggestion would be to make the most out of these 7 years and store up all of that food, because you're going to want it for the next 7 years. And as a result, Pharaoh puts Joseph in charge and he does all this stuff. And the famine is ultimately what causes Jacob and the family to come down from Canaan into Egypt and causes the whole thing to get, the reconciliation of the family, right? But Joseph also interprets dreams before that. He interprets the chief wine steward and the chief baker while they're in jail. And he's got dreams about, the moon and the stars and all of them bow down. In fact, that's what really makes his brothers mad, is he tells these dreams, and in the dreams, they're all bowing down to Joseph. And they're like, hey, we're not doing that. He's like the youngest guy, and we're, not having that. So that's why they sell him into slavery, and he goes off and ends up down in Egypt. So the only thing you can do if you're king is call on your advisors. Now, remember, how long has he been king?
2 years.
2 years, 2 years, maybe 3, right? I mean, 2.5, somewhere. He's not a long-term king. He hasn't been sitting on the throne for 10 or 15 years. He's got all these advisors. In fact, what was he doing before he became king?
He's running around and having an army.
Yeah, he was a general, right? So he's not, yes, he, I guess, grew up in the palace, and he grew up around his own dad, who was king, but then his father dies and he becomes king, and he's not ready for this, really. He knows how to run an army. He doesn't necessarily know how to run a kingdom, because they're two different things. And so he's inherited a bunch of people. So what happens when you get a new president? A new president gets elected, and they go to Washington, and what do? Yeah, they get, and do they get to pick their cabinet, or they get stuck with the last guy's cabinet? They pick it, right? They pick all of their cabinet. So they bring all their advisors in because they want people who are going to be aligned with their policies and their way of thinking. But you know what they don't get to pick? Generally, they don't get to pick the bureaucracy. Like, so all of the people who work in Washington, they may be liberals, they may be conservatives, but guess what? If you're at the Securities and Exchange Commission or the Department of Justice, and you are, you're a lawyer there, right? Or even the FBI, right? You're there, administration after administration after administration. And so in this particular case, where do these magicians and conjurers and sorcerers come from?
Probably the last king.
Probably his dad, right? So they've been around, and so now he's got his dad's gods. Well, maybe that's okay, but maybe it's not okay. Maybe you don't know if you trust your dad's gods. Maybe you'd like to have your own gods. Maybe that's part of the whole thing around teaching Daniel and his friends and the young men from Jerusalem, a lot of the wisdoms, because he's trying to maybe set up his own administration. So what's listed? Who does he consult? He consults a couple of different types of things that are listed. So tell me what they are. Magicians. Magicians. You got some astrologers. You've got Chaldeans.
I do as well.
You have, all right, so.
I have 4.
Okay. We got Chaldeans. All right, so so I know you're New King James. I know you're New King James. You must be New King James.
ESV.
ESV, okay. ESV, NIV,
NASB says Chaldeans.
Chaldeans.
Mine got alternate. Chaldeans. But in there.
I got it with CH.
It's
Yeah, but it's pronounced, it's cut,
They'll
like school, cut.
I got sorcerers. Shoot.
You got sorcerers, okay. You got sorcerers.
and enchanters as well. And then I have a soothsayer priest.
Okay, you got soothsayer priests.
Well, we should. Sorcerers.
Well, my Chaldean is not hooked up to astrologers, they're separate listed.
So you've got Chaldeans and astrologers.
Yeah, it says magicians, astrologers, sorcerers, and Chaldeans.
Okay, so there's all these guys, right? And they're all a little bit different in terms of the connotations of the word. So the magicians these were the guys who were supposed to be able to tell the future. And then the conjurers, let's see, did we put conjurers down? Conjurers. Now, I suppose I should go in and try and figure out in the different versions what maps to what. But I think your conjurers probably map up with your sorcerers.
Yeah.
And these guys were, in the old D&D terms, necromancers.
Oh, really?
Ooh.
Well, that's for me.
Necromancers, Necromancer. What's a necromancer? Anybody? Yeah, so they're not like raising the dead. They're not, running around with armies of skeletons behind them, right? But they were the ones who were supposed to be able to talk to the dead. Okay.
So mediums.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, mediums would be a good translation. So we're talking to the dead here. So we got guys who talk to the dead. We got guys who tell the future. We've got people who cast spells. That's the enchanters.
Would that be the Chaldeans?
Yeah, mine says the Chaldeans actually are the priestly caste that may have studied astrology.
Okay, I don't have enchanters. Yeah, why are they?
So what I can try and do in my notes is go back and take a look at some of the different versions and map them up and see what words are used when. Okay. Yeah, I can do it. Well.
The message uses fortune tellers.
Yeah, well, fortune tellers, that's okay. That's fine, right? So in other words, he's got this whole range of people who hang around the court, right? And they show up and they say, "Oh, king, hey, guess what? Let me tell you the future." Or, "We're studying the stone, king. It's a good omen. Let's go attack these guys because the omen in the stars is telling us it's an okay thing to go do." By the way, I think that the folks who show up in Jerusalem in Matthew are probably some of these astrologers, right? And we'll find out that Daniel is going to get placed over all of these guys at some point, and probably starts teaching them some of the prophecies that he's got. So he's got this cast of characters, okay? And he brings them before him and he says to them, what? What does he want? What's the problem?
He wants them to tell him his dream.
So he's had a dream, right? Apparently the dream is maybe a little bit disturbing. Bless you. All right. And he wants them to tell them the dream and the interpretation. Why do it this way? If you're Nebuchadnezzar, why do you do this? To prove they're not lying. I think that's a really good good explanation. Somebody look at, let's see. Let me see. Look at verse 5. Right, so first thing, verse 4, the Chaldeans show up and they speak, and this is where we switch to Aramaic, right? Remember we talked about the first part of the book, the first chapter of the book, down to this verse is written in Hebrew, and now it switches languages to Aramaic. And Aramaic was the language of the Gentiles. And why does it do that? Because now we're going to talk about the future of these Gentile kingdoms, okay? So the Chaldeans say, "O king, live forever," right? Good thing. You want the king to live forever. You never want to say bad things to the king, because if the king lives forever, then hopefully you get to live forever, right? And they're saying, "Well, tell us the dream and we'll tell you the interpretation." That was the way it was commonly done, right? Nathan walks in, he's had a bad dream. I say, "Nathan, man, you look upset. What's wrong?" "Oh, I had this dream." "What was it?" "Well, I dreamt that giant blueberries were rolling down a hill and attacking me, and right? See? And I said, wow, that's really interesting. I think it really could mean, it could be something symbolic of the overarching, challenges in your writing, and perhaps you have a writer's block that the blueberries represent, right? And so you can make stuff up, right? But if I said to Nathan, hey, Nathan, what's wrong? He said, I had this dream. Really? What is it? You're supposed to be pretty good at telling me these dreams. Well, you tell me what it was. I don't know what your dream was. I have no idea. I would not, well, now I would probably guess giant blueberries, but before 30 seconds ago, I would not have guessed giant blueberries. Okay? And the king answers them and says, okay, read verse 5. Who's Dash?
Yeah.
In your NIV version.
And
All right, read your New King James Version.
that's what I did. It's there now. It is fixed. It is solid. You're good.
Okay, read verse 5.
Verse 5, gotcha. The king answered and said to the Chaldeans, my decision is firm. If you do not make known the dream to me and its interpretation, you shall be cut to pieces and your house is made an ash.
All right, I just want you to read his first words. My decision is firm. All right, who's got a different version? What do you read? NASB.
Says the command from these first.
Okay, so command is firm. So same kind of thing. Who's got something different?
What did Josh read?
He read the New King James.
Verse 5,
Verse 5.
firmly decided.
Huh, really?
This is what I firmly decided.
But I have firmly decided. Really?
I have an ESV. The word from me is firm.
The word from me is firm. Okay, so all of this is firmness, and I, the king, have kind of decided what's going on. The problem is that that's not literally what it says. So if you want to cross it out in your scripture, you can. Because what it really says is the king says, the thing is gone from me. Literally, that's what it is. So the thing, which we assume means the dream, is gone from me.
Totally different.
It's totally different. So what that means is that your editors of your versions have decided to interpret it, try to interpret it for you, which is kind of unusual in the King James and the New. In fact, does anybody have a King James or can switch to a King James version? You got King James?
Yeah.
Read verse 5.
The king answered and said to the Chaldeans, the thing is gone from me. If ye will not make.
That's you're good. The thing is gone from me. Right? That's literally what the verse says. So for some reason, all the other versions, the editors have said, no, my decision is firm. It's a little odd that that they've done that. But the thing is gone from me. So the king is basically saying what? What? Yeah, that I don't remember what the dream is. Right? I just know I had this really bad dream and I keep having the dream and I wake up and I know the dream is the same dream every time, but I don't know what it is. You guys are going to tell me. Now, we can't tell. We don't know whether the king is making that up and he does remember the dream and this is part of the test, or whether he really is serious and said, yeah, I don't remember what it is, but you guys got to help me. So we're not entirely sure what's going on here.
If he kept having it and couldn't remember and it was starting to scare us, that would explain the nuclear option he's going with here.
Well, it could be. So what's going to happen if they can't tell him the dream? Yeah, literally, it's rendered torn limb from limb. And so what they would do in Babylon is they would tie 4 trees and bend them over to the ground.
Oh my gosh.
And then they would tie one of your limbs to each tree. And then they would go, okay, go. And all 4 limbs would get, trees would get cut at the same time, and the ropes get cut, and you literally would be torn into pieces. So it's,
That'll teach you then.
Let's teach you.
So when the Babylonians decided they were going to kill you, they did not mess around. Okay. Now, what do the Chaldeans say? What do all of these guys respond to the king with? Tell us the dream. He says, no, I'm not telling you the dream. You guys tell me the dream and the interpretation, or I'm serious, I will cut you in pieces. And then they respond and say what?
No one can do that.
No one can do that. You can't ask this of us. This is too hard. It's be like you guys sitting in front of your class, your teachers, and say, you can't ask us that question. Nobody can answer that question. That's ridiculous, right? Furthermore, who could answer the question? The gods. But what about the gods? They don't dwell with men. Well, wait a minute. What's Nebuchadnezzar's role? He's the link to the gods. So if your advisors say, yeah, only somebody who's really, really smart could do that, and you're not that smart, right? Right? And what in effect, that's kind of what they're saying. They say, hey, look, only the gods could tell that, and the gods don't dwell with men. Whoa, that's like blasphemy. You don't want to say that to the king, right? You've said, "Oh, king, live forever," and now you've just basically called him ugly and stupid. That's so, and that I think is probably why he overreacts, or well, we think it appears to be a little bit of an overreaction to not being able to tell a dream. But this is why he says, "That's it, I'm done. I'm going to round you guys up, and we're going to go ahead and get rid of a lot of you. We're going to have this is called a staff reduction." In corporate terms, okay? This is a large layoff, and we'll bring in some new help. And where is Daniel and his friends during all this? Where?
Sorry, I was saying termination. Literally.
Yeah, this is a literal termination. I'm sorry you've been terminated. So where's Daniel? Where? Do you think it doesn't appear that he's there? Because they have to go and look for Daniel and his friends. But now Daniel, unfortunately, and okay, bonus points. Here we go. Bonus points for the Jewish names. Just one. Give me one. Oh, one name. One.
Azariah.
All right, we got one.
Yeah.
Oh,
This is why you watch.
well, you didn't raise. Well, you didn't yell.
I raised my hand.
Oh, okay, all right. And you get a candy. And you get a candy. This is kind of fun. I did toss one to you, Lauren. I see it's still here. You didn't catch it. So.
Yeah, there's just the ones you.
Okay. Who wants this one?
Rough day for Lauren Alstrom.
There, we with the bed. Okay, so
Provision it yet.
that's where we are, right? We've got the king. We've got a dream. King either doesn't remember the dream, or he's setting the wise men up as a test to say what's going on. Now the wise men have said, "Hey, we just can't help you." And he says, "That's fine. I can kill you guys and get some more wise men. You wise men are a dime a dozen, no problem." Okay, so let's look at verses 14 to 23. That's a lot of verses. Who wants to read verses 14 to 19?
Sure.
Ben, why don't you start with 14 to 19, and Julia, you can read 20 to 23.
I'm all right. I would offer that one, like, pronounce it.
That's all right. We don't care about
If you don't
that.
know, just make a
You got it, Ben?
Yeah.
All right.
Then,
Listen up.
then Daniel answered with,
Whoop. Verse 14.
oh, I am in the wrong verse. Second one. Verse 14.
Yep.
What is that?
Chapter 2, verse 14.
Daniel chapter 2. When Arioch, the commander,
Arioch.
What is it?
Arioch.
Arioch, the commander of the king's guard, had gone out to put to death the wise men of Babylon. Daniel spoke to him with wisdom and tact. He asked the king's officer, "Why did the king issue such a harsh decree?" Arioch then explained the matter to Daniel. At this, Daniel went into the king and asked for time so that he might interpret the dream for him. Then Daniel returned to his house and explained the matter to his friends, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. He urged them to plead for mercy from God, the God of heaven, concerning this mystery, so that he and his friends may not be executed with the rest of the wives in Babylon. During the night, the mystery was revealed to Daniel in a vision. Then Daniel praised the God of heaven.
All right, Julia.
Daniel answered and said, Blessed be the name of God forever and ever, for wisdom and might are his. And he changes the times and the seasons. He removes kings and raises up kings. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those who have understanding. He reveals deep and secret things. He knows what is in the darkness, and light lies in him. I thank you and praise you, O God of my fathers. You have given me wisdom and might, and have now made known to me what we have asked of you. For you have made known to us the king's matters.
Okay, so Daniel and his friends, they're just sitting around eating vegetables, right? And Arioch, the head of the king's guard, comes in and says, I've got some good news and bad news. The good news is you're not going to have to eat vegetables anymore. Bad news is I'm here to kill you, okay? And what does Daniel respond with? What? Hey, whoa, what's, why so hasty? Let's not stop, let's not start trying to keep the trees, just yet. What's going on? And Arioch is going to explain it to him. Does Arioch have to explain it to him? No, right? In fact, he's got the king's order, right? There's more risk to him by stopping and telling these guys what's going on than just say, hey, sorry, this is, roll the dice, bad day for the king. You guys are all dead, here you go, right? But how does Daniel respond to it? What's it say? Daniel answers with what? Or Daniel responds with wisdom and tact, right? So Daniel responds with some wisdom. Isn't that very different than how Nebuchadnezzar responded to his advisors giving him bad news? How would you respond if somebody came in and said, hey, guess what? I'm sorry, today we outlawed worshiping Jesus and we're going to have to kill the Bible study tonight. That's, that's what's going on. I guarantee some of us would weep and wail and go, start screaming and yelling. That's not what Daniel does. And perhaps because he doesn't respond that way, Arioch actually gives him the time. He actually explains what's going on to him and tells him what the deal is. Now, do you think people worried about bringing Daniel bad news? So remember, how old is he? Let's say he was 15 when he was brought to Jerusalem. How old is he? He's like your age. And they walked in and say, hey, Danny, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to kill you. I like you and all, but, king's orders. And Daniel has the maturity and the wisdom to be able to say, hold on, tell me why. Let's not be so hasty, right? And my guess is he has that character in him for the rest of his life. And we'll see he has that same character for the rest of his life. Up into his 80s, yeah. So would you rather go tell Daniel something's gone wrong or Nebuchadnezzar something's gone wrong? I'd rather go tell Daniel, right? There's going to be lots of times in your lives where something's going to go wrong. And you are going to be the recipient of the bad news. Your parents, right? You'll become parents, probably, most of you. And your kids will come to you with bad news. Don't do what I do, which is go from 0 to 60, right? I try to not do that, but Lauren, it's true that I occasionally do that, isn't it?
Yes.
Yes. Good, no commentary necessary. It's true, right? I am not as patient as I should be, right? In those days, I'm more like Nebuchadnezzar than I am Daniel. but we should all strive to be more like Daniel, because when you react that way, when you react the way Daniel reacts, people will actually tell you things. They'll bring you news. They'll tell you things you need to know. Sometimes as a leader or a parent, you need to know when something bad is happening. And you want your kids or your employees or your friends to be able to come to you and say, hey, I've got, I need to talk to you about something, right? And if you don't get that, then the bad thing, it may be easier in the short run not to give bad news, but it definitely is not easier in the long run. Things definitely do not work themselves out generally. So remember that, right? So Daniel's not present at the order, but not only does Arioch give him the time of day, he's able to go back into the king. So he's already got a reputation, right, where he can go to the king and he can get past the guards. The guards don't say, wait a minute, you're one of those wise guys, you were supposed to be killed, get him out of here and take care of him, right? So think about your reputation, right? What kind of reputation do you want? This is a guy who at 18 has access to the king. Now I personally think we're in year 3 of the reign, and he has passed his test, and so he's been shown to be a really smart guy. And the king probably, look, the king probably likes him. So God's blessed him with that ability to not only pick up the knowledge and the understanding, but he's blessed him with the character and a personality that the king at least respects enough to listen. Because the king, based on how he reacted to the other wise guys, could very well have just said, hey, that's it, I'm done with the whole lot of you, right? The whole senior class is gone, right? We're going to start high school over again. Bring me some new freshmen. Okay? So he goes in and he says, hey, king, can we have a little bit of time? And the king says, yes. The king doesn't. Now, the Chaldeans, his wise guys, maybe they could have stolen for time. But he does say, doesn't the king say, hey, I know for a fact that you guys are just stalling for time?
Yes.
Yeah, I know for certain you would gain time because you see that my decision is firm, right? So, so it's interesting that he doesn't give his senior staff time, but Daniel comes in and says, look, what's one more day? You're going to kill me tomorrow. Anyway, remember Princess Bride, right? Where, he talks about being on the pirate ship, and he said, oh, the great pirate Roberts. He said every night he would say, good night, Wesley, I'll probably kill you in the morning, right? Oh, you can always kill me in the morning. Okay, so just give me 12 hours to go and see if my God can help out with this. And the king, amazingly, miraculously, says yes. Right? The story could have ended very quickly for Daniel and his friends if he just said, no, we're not doing that. So this is an important point. That is the difference between the Babylonians and the next empire that's going to come, and what we're going to see in chapter 6. In the Babylonian Empire, the king has absolute authority, right? He can change his mind. He can say, I'm going to kill you. And then say, well, maybe not. No, forget it. Hey, stop the execution. Let's keep him around for another day. He writes good poetry. He's fine, right? And then he can say, the next day, I'm going to kill him again, right? But I didn't like that poem. It didn't rhyme right. In the Medo-Persian Empire, which is going to come next, the king does not have that absolute authority. He can make a law and he can sign a law into being, but once that law is signed, he can't just arbitrarily change it. And we'll find out that that's one of the problems that affects Daniel, because the king's going to realize, oh, I wrote this really bad law, and Daniel's going to get turned on the lion's den. There's nothing I can do about it. Even though I'm king, I can't just say, forget that law, right? So, but Nebuchadnezzar can. He can do that. So he's able to put his execution order on hold, and he gives Daniel some time. And what does Daniel go and do? And yeah, so he calls a Bible study. He says, we better get together, because we know that we don't know this dream. We have no idea what it is, but there's only, but God can tell us what this dream is. And so they spend the night in prayer. And what's the first thing that he's doing is taking the whole matter to God. Like, they don't go back and say, look, Hananiah, I want you to draw me a map of the castle. And Azariah, look, you go out and figure out what time the guards are patrolling, and let's devise the escape plan. We'll get out of here. We'll get lost in the city. We'll be fine. Nobody will catch us. Right? They don't do that. He doesn't build his own strategies. He turns to God first. And what happens when we have trouble most of the time in our lives, right, is we try and figure out how to fix things first. What am I going to do to fix it? And Daniel is giving us an example here of turning to the Lord. And it doesn't have to be a life-threatening situation. You know, if you're trying to figure out what you want to do with your life, what school you might want to go to, I mean, all of these different things in our lives, he's not just like the in case of glass, break and push the red button. And he's supposed to be the first place we go. And too many times in our lives, we use him like this. We're like, well, this didn't work, and that didn't work, and the other thing didn't work, so I guess I better pray about it. And so Daniel is a role model for us to say, hey, let's go to prayer first. Now, there's three ways God answers prayer. He'll say what? He'll say, yes, here you go. And that's what he's going to do for Daniel and his friends. Why? Because this is all part of God's plan. This is not just about Daniel and Nebuchadnezzar. This is about God. God is about to reveal history before it happens. Okay, so this is where it's heading for God. And so when we talk about God's plan, I think we generally should be talking about God's plan for redemption of the heavens, right? Redemption of the earth, redemption of creation. Right? The fact that his plan starts even before the foundation of the world, because he knows Adam and Eve are going to mess things up. And he knows that Jesus has already agreed to come to earth at some point at the exact right time and be the Messiah and die for the sins of the world. He knows he's going to pick a people and have a chosen people called the Jews. And that's how he's going to get and introduce Jesus to the world. Okay? So this is God's plan with a big P, okay? Now God may have a plan for you or me or others. And in fact, I think God put Daniel in this place and time to do something very specific, because there were other kids from Jerusalem who got picked up and taken to Babylon, and they're not part of the story. So they were eating the king's food and drinking the king's wine and maybe learning the culture, but they're not who God chose or not who God raised up. It'd be interesting. Maybe God used them in some other way that we just don't know about, right? There's all sorts of really interesting characters in the Bible who are mentioned like 2 or 3 times, or sometimes even once, where you go, huh? Like we were in Bible study last week in church, and we were talking about the trial of Jesus and the scene in the garden, and they all show up to take Jesus, and Peter pulls out his sword and lops off the ear of one of the servants, and Jesus heals the ear. You're like, wow. So, like in 2 verses, that's all we know about the guy. Wouldn't it be interesting to write a story about how he got there to the garden that night, and then what happened to him afterwards? Right? How do you have your ear lopped off and somebody heals it miraculously and you not be changed? So does this guy go on to become a Christian? Does this guy perhaps go on and even end up, getting executed at some point? I don't know, but it's interesting to think about. So anyway, God can say yes to your prayers. What else can he say? He can say no, right? God can sometimes say, look, I know you're asking this, but that's actually not really good. And you will find in your lives that at some point you will look back on something that you prayed about and you say, man, I'm actually glad God didn't grant that prayer. Right? Because if he granted that prayer about something that I thought was so important that I really, really wanted here, my life would have gone a totally different direction. And
or even just understand that his ways are not our ways.
Right.
even if you really, really still want that thing.
That's right. That's exactly right. So Patty said that God's ways are not our ways. And I know that there's a verse somewhere for that, but I'm the worst at memorizing scriptures. So what's the third thing God can say? Wait, yeah. Quiet, silence, not going to answer you right now. Maybe, right? Kind of all of those things and God, what?
Maybe never answer.
He may never answer. You may never get the answer to the prayer. And maybe, and I don't know why. I don't know why, whether that means that maybe that prayer actually wasn't that important a prayer, right? Or maybe the situation will work. God already knows how the situation is going to work itself out. Don't know. But sometimes God doesn't answer those prayers directly. In this case, though, he has answered Daniel directly. And Daniel is going to get an understanding of the vision. And how does he respond? How does Daniel respond? So he's identified the problem. He's turned to God in prayer. He and his friends have prayed all night about it. God answers his prayer, right? And he answers his prayer directly. Sometimes God answers our prayers in ways that we don't really recognize that God is answering our prayer. And sometimes he will do something, well, that's not what I asked for. And 2 years later, it turns out, wow, that's actually just what I need. And I get a perspective here that I don't have here. And it's important to remember that and to trust in God to say, okay, I don't have to understand how or why God is doing things the way he's doing it. Sometimes God that's the benefit of being God. He doesn't have to explain it to us. He often does, but he doesn't have to. So in this case, he's explaining it to Daniel, and Daniel responds and does what? Does he say, thank goodness, I was smart enough and good enough and good looking enough for God to come to me and give me the answer? Okay, why don't you go back to verses 20 through 23? And does what? He blesses God. But blessed be the name of God forever and ever, for wisdom and might are his. What did James tell us? If any of you lack wisdom, do what? Yeah, let him ask God, who gives to all men liberally or generously or freely. Right? We talked about this when we talked about James. Do you all lack wisdom sometimes? I do. Ask God. Are you going to God first for that wisdom, or are you going to, the Oprah show? Right? There's a lot of people who think they have wisdom, and there are a lot of smart people, and your grandparents have wisdom that they've gotten from years and years and years of living. And sometimes they give you really good advice, and sometimes they don't. Right? God's always going to give you good advice. God's word is always. And look, I don't generally believe. I think God can speak to you if he chooses to you. I generally don't believe that's how he does it. I generally believe that God speaks to us today through his word, which we have. Right? And yes, not everything in the world today is in the Bible. Well, people say, well, what about this or that? That's not in the Bible. What about, I don't know what car to buy, and that's not in the Bible. Well, okay, that's actually not really that important. Right? The important stuff in life is in the Bible. Okay, so he says, wisdom and might are his, and he changes the times and the seasons. He removes kings and raises up kings. It's interesting that Daniel, kind of talks about that. Maybe, well, A, that's a little bit of foreshadowing for what the dream's going to be about. Okay, but B, he's just been through a period where, gosh, the king of Jerusalem has been deposed, right? And this new king that people don't know, this Nebuchadnezzar guy is now the king. Right? And he's saying, hey, God's in that. We were talking this morning, and it was really interesting because you remember when Jesus gets taken out into the desert, right? He reveals, it's like in Luke chapter 4, and he reveals in the synagogue his ministry. He reads from the prophet Isaiah, and he says, this day is that scripture fulfilled. And they're like, what? Is he saying what I think he's saying? And we miss it because we don't understand what Isaiah said. We don't really look at it that way. But the people there totally get it. Because what do? They try and take him and throw him off the mountain. right? So whenever we miss something in scripture, usually somebody picks up a rock and starts throwing it at Jesus. You go, oh, that must have been important, right? Don't ever say that people didn't understand what he was claiming. They always seem to understand what he's claiming because they always either react and go, wow, that's awesome, or you got to kill this guy, right? It's kind of, there really wasn't that much of an in-between. But he goes out to the desert right after that, and he's there for how long? 40 days, right? So that period of tempting, that number of trial and temptation. And who shows up? Satan. And what's he do? He tries to tempt Jesus, right? And what do you remember the temptations? There's 3. Food, yep. Food, what?
Power.
Protection, right? So let's see. If I was a real pastor, I could pick all P's for those things, right? And the 3 P's, right, of the temptations, right? But it'll come to me later. So one of them, he takes Jesus up and he shows him all the kingdoms of the world, and he says, "Hey, I will give you all the kingdoms of the world if you worship me." And what does Jesus say? Does he say, you can't do that, they don't belong to you? That's not really a temptation. Get out of here, beat it. He does not say that. He does say, get thee behind me, Satan, right? But he does not contradict the fact that Satan says, everything that you see has been given over to me. Right? When you read scripture, you'll see that they talk about the power of the prince of the air, or the prince of this age, or the prince of the world. That's Satan that they're talking about. And so it's interesting here. So if Satan has charge basically of everything, but Daniel's now saying here, hey, God raises kings up and deposes kings. What do we do with that? Right? Is Satan in charge of the world, or is God in charge of the world? How do we think about that? That's like, I started thinking about that this morning in the middle of Sunday school class. I probably didn't pay attention to the rest of the Sunday school lesson. But it's interesting, right? Because you go, well, is that a contradiction? And I think where I've gotten to is, no, it's not a contradiction. In general, Satan's in charge in the world, right? And we fight not against flesh and blood, but we fight against, principalities and powers and all these supernatural things and wickedness in the heavenlies. And that's why Paul tells us to put on the full armor of God, because you're going against really big stuff. And so in general, yes, Satan's in charge of this world. But that doesn't mean that God can't pick a man or a woman and raise that person up to do a specific thing that's part of the big P plan when he needs to. And so I think, just think about, our founding fathers, right? Who are, you can read, and people say, well, they really weren't Christians. They were deists, or they were just spiritual. Look, most of them are very clearly Christian. Okay. Now they may, just like we might all say we're Christians, but we might all have different points of view on specific things in scripture. That doesn't mean we're not Christian. Okay. And yet, what would it have been like if God hadn't maybe raised up a George Washington or a John Adams or a Thomas Jefferson? Right? What would World War II have been like if England hadn't had a Churchill? Right? I think God does put certain people in. Now, I don't know whether God picked President Biden to win or he let it happen. I don't know whether God picked President Trump because he was, saying, hey, I don't want Hillary in there, or he let it happen. I don't know. I think we get into maybe some dangerous ground when we start making claims like that, because we don't know. Because if you say, well, God, my guy won, the good guy won, and God picked him. Well, okay, what happens in the next election when the good guy didn't win again?
Well, you can go all the way back to when Jesus is in the garden, and Jesus himself was saying, Lord, take this cup from me. I don't want this, right? But you will be done. And God's answer to Jesus was no.
Yeah.
He told Jesus as a man, no. And he allowed that to happen to Jesus because it was part of his bigger plan.
Part of the big P plan. That's right. So, all right, just, all right, so he's going to reveal knowledge to those who have understanding, and he's going to reveal the deep and the dark and secret things. And he knows what is in the darkness, and that's where we're going to stop tonight. Halfway through the chapter, and yeah, well, we're only 10. Well, we're not even really 10 minutes over because some people were slow to, kind of get ready for the lesson. And I lost my notes. I did lose my notes, right? Yeah, so anyway, right, there's a lot of stuff in here for us to unpack. It's good stuff. And just, it's kind of fun to think about, okay, okay, so here's the Hollywood pitch. Here's the basics of the script, right? We got a really bad king. He's got a problem. His soothsayers can't help him. So he's ready to clean house. But wait, the good-looking young Tom Cruise hero comes in and says, look, give me a chance, right? And we're going to find out that chance is going to get rewarded. Okay? All right, questions? Make sense? All right, this part makes sense. Wait till we get to next week. Next week, we're going to talk about the dream. So who read chapter 2 in advance? Okay, technically you did finish it before the lesson started. Who else? Yes. Nobody online either. All right, look. Oh, okay, Scott. Scott said he did. Okay.
That was Lance. Wait.
I didn't read it last week.
That was Lance.
Oh, that was Lance. I'm sorry. Sorry, guys. Okay, so for next week, read all of chapter 2. Just read what we read, work your way into it. Think of it like a running start, and then we'll talk about the dream, and I will do some artwork. I know. If nothing else brings you back, that'll do. All right. So who wants to close us out in prayer tonight? You got it, Drew. Go ahead. Nice and loud for them to hear too.
Dear Lord, we just thank you for this day. Thank you that we're able to come to Bible study and just learn more about your word. I pray that just we're able to take heart that through any hard situation that we can come to you. We should go to you first. I pray that we're able to apply this to our lives during this week, and that we just come ready next week to continue learning about you. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. We'll stop the recording.